We were planning a wedding. But behind my back, she emptied our savings, lied to my face, and opened a loan in my name. I guess every story like this starts with, I never thought it would happen to me. But seriously, I didn't. I'm not naive. I've always considered myself a cautious guy when it comes to money and relationships. I grew up watching my dad get burned financially after his divorce, so I swore I'd never be the guy who let love cloud his common sense. And yet, here I am, sitting on my friend's couch with a half-packed duffel bag at my feet, wondering how the hell I got here. Her name is Jenna. We met 3 years ago at a charity event my company sponsored. She was volunteering, I was pretending to care about wine and cheese platters, and somehow, she managed to make me laugh about something that had to do with goat yoga and an allergic reaction. She had this magnetic kind of energy, smart, quick with a comeback, and one of those people who could carry a conversation in any room. I was hooked fast. Honestly, too fast. Within a year, we moved in together. I was 33, she was 30, and it just felt right. We talked about everything, kids, careers, long-term goals. Jenna was a marketing exec for a fashion brand, and she always had this big-picture mentality. She said things like, "We're building an empire, babe," and I actually bought into it. I started picturing that empire with her. She loved the idea of a big wedding. I didn't care much one way or the other, a courthouse and tacos would have been fine with me, but seeing her get excited about color schemes and venues made me want it too. I had a decent savings account, she had some money from a small inheritance, and we agreed to pool together around $35,000 for the wedding. It was a stretch, but we figured we'd make it work by keeping things relatively modest. At least, that's what I thought. We got engaged on New Year's Eve. I proposed at this rooftop bar downtown, all fairy lights and overpriced cocktails. I had this whole plan worked out with the staff, and she cried in that movie-perfect way when I got down on one knee. People clapped. A stranger handed us champagne. For a second, I thought, I really did it. I found the one. The first weird thing happened a couple of weeks later. Jenna asked if she could be in charge of managing the wedding budget. "You're slammed with work," she said, "and I want this to be my full-time obsession for a while." I agreed. She's organized, meticulous even, and honestly, I liked not having to think about floral arrangements and invitation fonts. She created a shared spreadsheet in Google Docs with a list of expenses, and I peeked at it once or twice. Everything looked fine. Normal wedding stuff, deposits for venue and catering, DJ quotes, dress fittings. But somewhere along the line, she stopped updating it. When I asked about it, she waved it off. Things got a little chaotic, but I've got it under control. Don't worry. I didn't love that answer, but I let it go. My first real red flag came the day she picked me up from work in a car I didn't recognize. I walked out of the office expecting her grey Hyundai and instead saw a brand new Porsche Macan parked at the curb. She stepped out of it like it was no big deal, flashing me a grin like a kid showing off a science fair trophy. "Surprise," she said, tossing me the keys. "Well, not for you. It's mine." I laughed at first. "What is this, a rental?" "Nope," she said, flipping her hair over one shoulder. "I bought it." "Isn't she gorgeous?" My stomach dropped. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. "You bought it?" "Technically leased, but I put a down payment down. I've wanted one forever." I stood there frozen on the sidewalk. "With what money?" Her smile faltered for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. "I had some savings." "You mean from your inheritance?" "Partially." I don't remember exactly what I said after that. Something between a stunned "Are you serious?" and a very confused "What about the wedding fund?" That was when she hit me with the lie I wouldn't realize was a lie until much later. "I didn't touch our wedding money," she said, placing a hand on my chest. "I have a bonus coming next month, and I figured I could swing the down payment without affecting anything. This is an investment in me. A reward for how hard I've worked." A reward. It felt off. My gut was telling me this wasn't how people who are building an empire together operate. But I wanted to believe her. I didn't want to be the guy who accuses his fiancée of lying over a car. So I did the one thing I promised myself I'd never do, I let it slide. But after that, the cracks started forming fast. We were 2 months out from the wedding date when I tried to book a florist Jenna had raved about. I offered to put down the deposit since I'd just gotten a bonus of my own, and she got weirdly flustered. "Oh, I already took care of that one," she said. I asked her to show me the invoice, just to make sure we weren't double booking. She said she'd email it to me later. Days went by. No email. Then, a week later, I got a call from our credit card company. A fraud alert. they said our joint card was maxed out and asked me to verify a series of charges, luxury boutique purchases, $800 at some interior design store, a $1,200 dinner reservation that apparently got cancelled but not refunded. I was floored. We barely used the card except for grocery runs and utility bills. When I confronted Jenna, she went full deflection mode. "Relax," she said. "It's not a big deal. I just moved some money around while waiting on a bank transfer to clear. I'll take care of it." But this wasn't just a missed payment. The card was nearly $15,000 in the red. I asked her point blank, "Did you use our wedding fund?" She stared at me for a long time. Too long. Then she said, "I needed to feel good. Things have been so stressful. I didn't think it would matter." That's when I knew. She used it. Probably all of it. The Porsche, the designer shoes, the credit card debt, it all made sense. And the worst part? She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't crying or panicking or offering to fix it. She was annoyed. Like I was making too big a deal out of a little debt. "I was going to tell you," she said, like that was supposed to soften the blow. I just didn't want to ruin the vibe. The vibe? I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just sat there on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, trying to count how many signs I had ignored. How many times had she deflected a question? How many times had I trusted that things were handled? I thought about our future, a mortgage, kids, retirement, and realized I didn't trust her with a single one of those things anymore. I told her I needed some space to think. Packed a small bag. Came to my friend Marcus's place. And now I'm sitting here wondering how long it's going to take to unravel this mess. The wedding's supposed to be in 6 weeks. Invitations are out. Deposits are down. People have booked flights. My mom is calling twice a day asking about seating charts and hotel room blocks. But all I can think about is that Porsche sitting in the driveway like a shiny, 6-figure middle finger to everything we were supposed to build. I haven't officially called off the wedding yet. But I know I will. Because if she could lie to me this easily about our future, then we never really had one to begin with. I woke up on Marcus's couch the next morning with a stiff neck and a pit in my stomach. The kind of pit that just sits there, heavy and unmoving, like your body knows something's off before your brain catches up. For a few seconds, I just stared at the ceiling, pretending none of this had happened. Pretending Jenna didn't blow through our wedding fund on a luxury car and swipe our credit cards to the max like it was Monopoly money. Pretending I wasn't sitting on the edge of detonating the most public, expensive, emotionally draining decision of my life. Marcus was already up. He'd left a mug of coffee and a granola bar on the counter like I was some hungover teenager. I appreciated it. Marcus doesn't talk unless you ask him to. That's the kind of friend you want when your life's unraveling, someone who won't give you advice unless you ask for it, but who's got a clean pillowcase and a spare set of keys waiting just in case. Around 9 a.m., my phone started lighting up. Texts from Jenna. 3 in a row. Jenna, hey. Can we talk today? Jenna, I'm sorry about yesterday. I really am. Jenna, please come home so we can figure this out. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to. But because I didn't trust what I'd say if I opened that door. Anger? Disappointment? Or worse, that soft, stupid part of me that still wanted to believe she had a good reason, or that maybe I was overreacting. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it and tossing it face down on the couch. I needed answers. I needed to know exactly how deep the hole was, not just emotionally, but financially. Because if she'd lied about the car and the credit cards, who's to say there wasn't more? I drove back to the apartment that afternoon while she was at work. I didn't want to see her. I just wanted to pull our financial records and start sorting through the mess. We had a shared desktop where we kept bills, scanned receipts, and tax docs. Jenna never cared much for passwords or two-factor authentication. I guess she trusted me, so I was able to get in easily. And what I found made my stomach turn. There were accounts I didn't even know she had, 2 department store cards, a line of credit from some flashy lifestyle brand, and a buy now pay later loan for furniture we didn't need. Altogether, there was over $42,000 in unsecured debt with her name on it. And most of it accrued in the last 9 months. The Porsche? That wasn't a lease. It was financed with a balloon loan. The $100,000 Macon came with a brutal payment plan and a down payment of $20,000. $20,000. That was almost our entire wedding fund. The real kicker? Her bonus that she kept mentioning? It didn't exist. I found her last 2 pay stubs buried in a folder. There was no bonus. Just a steady paycheck, barely enough to cover minimums on the loans she was stacking up. I sat there staring at the screen, fingers clenched into fists. It felt like I'd been mugged in broad daylight, except the mugger was someone I loved. Someone I trusted enough to share a future with. I backed everything up. Scanned copies, statements, screenshots, the whole 9 yards. If this turned ugly, I wanted proof. As I packed the laptop away, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen table with my name written on it in Jenna's handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note. I know you're probably going to leave me. And I won't blame you if you do. I screwed up. I was trying to keep up with everything, and I didn't want to disappoint you. You're so steady. So good with money. I thought I could fix it before you noticed. I thought if I could just make everything work, you'd never have to know how badly I've been spiraling. I'm sorry, Ryan. I never meant to hurt you. That was the first time in 2 days I actually felt something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was grief. Because she wasn't a villain. Not really. She was a liar, yes. But under all that mess, I think she was also someone who was drowning in her own expectations. Trying to be the Instagram version of the perfect bride, perfect woman, perfect everything, and when she couldn't, she just borrowed the illusion. At my expense. I stayed in the apartment long enough to change clothes and pack up a few essentials. When I opened our bedroom closet, I saw the wedding dress bag hanging there, still zipped up like some ghost of what we were supposed to be. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Later that night, I met with my mom. She'd been calling non-stop, asking about RSVPs and final seating charts. I figured it was time. We sat across from each other in her kitchen, same place where she used to help me with algebra homework and nurse me through my first heartbreak in high school. I told her everything. About the Porsche. The credit cards. The wedding fund. The lies. She didn't interrupt once. Just listened, lips pressed together in that way moms do when they're holding back a tidal wave of opinions. When I finished, she put a hand on mine and said, "Well, you just dodged a life sentence, honey." That made me laugh, a bitter, choked sound that felt more like a sob. But it helped. We spent the next hour going over logistics. Cancelling vendors. Calling my bank to put a freeze on our shared savings account. And finally, the hardest part, drafting the message I'd send to all our guests. The "we regret to inform you the wedding has been called off" text that felt like a failure announcement to every corner of my life. I hit send on the group message just before midnight. Responses started flooding in immediately. Some were kind. Some were shocked. A few cousins sent question marks or weird emojis. But one message stuck out. It was from Jenna's best friend, Rachel. "Rachel, I'm sorry, Ryan. I tried to talk to her about the spending months ago. She wouldn't listen. I wish things were different." That confirmed what I already suspected. People knew. They just didn't say anything. I was lying in Marcus's guest room, staring at the ceiling again, when I got the last message of the night. This one was from Jenna. "Jenna, I'll move out tomorrow. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Jenna moved out the next day. Quietly. No drama, no waterworks, no long goodbye speech. I was at work when it happened, and I honestly think she did it that way on purpose, maybe to avoid another confrontation, or maybe just to spare herself the humiliation of seeing me. All I know is I got a text from her around noon that said, "Jenna, I've packed my things. Left the keys on the kitchen counter. I'll send you my forwarding address once I have one." I read it while sitting in the conference room at work, half listening to a team lead drone on about Q2 projections. I wasn't even supposed to be back in the office yet, but I needed to feel like I was doing something normal. Like I still had control over some part of my life. After the meeting, I ducked into a stairwell and sat on the cold concrete step, trying to process the fact that she was really gone. When I got back to the apartment that evening, the place felt hollow. She hadn't taken much, a few boxes from the closet, her laptop, her vanity stuff, and most of her shoes. But somehow, everything felt stripped bare. Her scent was still lingering in the sheets. A coffee mug she always used was sitting in the sink. And the wedding dress bag was gone. I think that was the part that hit me the hardest. Seeing that bag was like watching the ghost of our future pack up and walk away. She did leave behind the Porsche. It was parked neatly in its usual spot, a shiny reminder of the decision that burned our relationship to the ground. And just as she promised, the keys were sitting on the counter next to a note. "I can't return the car, but I'm going to keep making the payments. You don't owe anything on it. I'll find someone to take it off my hands if I can. I know I've made things worse than I ever meant to. For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you. I didn't touch the keys. I wasn't about to take ownership of something that represented every lie she'd told. That night, I sat on the living room floor with a bottle of whiskey, a legal pad, and my laptop. I made a list of everything that needed to be handled, vendors to cancel, deposits to try to recover, shared accounts to close. I treated it like a project plan. Like if I organized the chaos into bullet points, I could somehow fix how messed up I felt. My phone buzzed around 9 p.m. It was a text from my best friend, Kevin. Kevin, I got your message. Man, I don't even know what to say. Want to get a drink tomorrow? I told him yeah. I needed to vent. Really vent. Marcus had been great, solid guy, gave me space, but Kevin was the kind of friend you could ugly cry with and still crack jokes 10 minutes later. We met at a bar near my office. One of those dimly lit places that serves both craft cocktails and cheap beer, depending on your mood. Kevin ordered a burger. I went straight for the bourbon. I keep running it back in my head, I said after a few sips. All the signs. The little red flags. And I just ignored them. Or made excuses. Kevin gave me a long look. You trusted her, man. That's not a flaw. Yeah, but maybe it was. I let her handle the money because she said she had it under control. And I didn't want to come off like some overbearing guy who didn't believe in his fiancée. She took advantage of that, he said bluntly. And that's on her. I nodded, but it still didn't sit right. I wasn't just mourning the relationship, I was mourning the version of myself that believed in it. That believed in her. I didn't know how to go back to being that guy. The next day, I got a call from one of the vendors, the photographer. He said he'd heard from Jenna earlier that week and was just confirming that everything was still on. I told him no. It wasn't. And I apologized for the late notice. He was kind about it. Said he understood, even offered to refund part of our deposit. That small act of decency almost brought me to tears. Not because of the money, but because someone wasn't trying to screw me over for once. I spent the next 2 days unwinding everything. Florist, cancelled. Caterer, partial refund. Venue or nothing back, but they offered to transfer the date to another event if I ever wanted to use it. Invitations had already gone out, of course, but I emailed everyone a second time to confirm the wedding was officially off. Some people reached out with support. Others stayed silent. One of the most unexpected calls came from Jenna's dad. We weren't close. He's a pretty reserved guy, former Navy, the type who shakes your hand hard and speaks in complete, efficient sentences. But he called me, and after a long pause, he said, I just want to say I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how to respond. Thanks. I appreciate that. She didn't tell us everything, he said. But Rachel filled in the gaps. Rachel again. Jenna's best friend. Honestly, I owed that girl a drink. I don't know what else to say, he continued. But if it means anything, I think you made the right call. I did something I wasn't expecting to do. I said, I don't think Jenna's a bad person. But she needs help. Serious help. There was a long silence. Then he said, she always wanted to be the perfect everything. Never could handle not measuring up. That started long before you. It explained a lot. But it didn't excuse it. After the call, I sat in the dark for a while, letting it all sink in. There was something freeing about knowing this wasn't entirely about me. That her decisions were rooted in deeper issues. But it also made me sad. Because if she had just been honest, maybe we could have fixed it. Or at least walked away without all the wreckage. By the weekend, the worst of it was over. Also I thought. I'd just finished folding laundry, something Jenna usually did while watching those terrible reality shows she loved, when my phone rang. It was Rachel. Hey, she said. I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I think you deserve to know. My heart dropped. What happened? I ran into Jenna earlier. We talked for a bit, and she told me something I think you should hear. She didn't just max out your cards. What do you mean? She took out a loan. In your name. My blood went cold. What? She said it was small. Like $5,000. For the dress and some extras she didn't want to bother you about. But still. She used your information. Without asking. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. Do you have proof? I don't, Rachel said. But she admitted it to me like it was no big deal. Like you'd understand eventually. I hung up and pulled up my credit reports immediately. Sure enough, there it was. A personal loan through some fintech company I'd never heard of. $5,000. Opened 6 months ago. In my name. She must have used my info from our taxes or a co-signed account. The trust one gave her had turned into a weapon. I spent the rest of the night filing fraud reports, contacting the company, and freezing my credit. I was livid. Not just at her, at myself. Forever thinking I could keep my heart and my finances in the same box. That night, I drafted an email. No more texts. No more grey areas. Subject, final message. Jenna. I found out about the loan you opened in my name. That crosses a line I can't ignore. I've already contacted the company and started a fraud claim. They'll be in touch with you. Whatever shred of trust one had left is gone. Please don't contact me again. Ryan. 2 days after I sent that final email, I woke up to an empty inbox. No reply from Jenna. No apologies. No attempts to deny or explain the loan she'd opened in my name. I don't know if that made things better or worse. Part of me expected another storm or more tears, another please understand, maybe even one of those grand gestures people make in movies when they realize they screwed everything up. But silence? That was worse. Because it meant she wasn't even trying anymore. I guess that should have been a relief. It meant she knew it was over. But when someone you've spent years with just fades like that, no closure, no accountability, nothing, it messes with your head. I kept rereading her last few texts like they held secret messages I missed the first time. Like maybe if I stared long enough, I'd find something in them that explained how the woman I loved turned into someone capable of gutting me financially and emotionally without blinking. I tried to bury it all in work. Took on extra projects, volunteered to lead meetings I normally avoided, stayed late even when there wasn't anything urgent. It was the only way I could keep from sitting in my apartment and thinking too much. The apartment, by the way, was becoming a problem. It was still full of little reminders of her. Not the big things, she'd taken most of those, but the invisible ones. The way the hallway smelled after she sprayed her perfume before work. The dent in the couch cushion where she used to curl up with her laptop. The silly polka dot mug in the back of the cabinet that I suddenly realized I hated. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. It was like trying to heal from a gunshot while living in the same room where it happened. I called my landlord and explained the situation, engagement called off, not a breakup I could bounce back from, etc. He was surprisingly kind about it and said if I gave 60 days notice and paid the early termination fee, I could walk away clean. So I started looking. Not just for a new apartment, but for a fresh start. One night, over beers and bad nachos, Kevin asked me something that caught me off guard. You ever think about moving out of the city? We were sitting at our usual spot, a dive bar near our old college campus, one that still smelled faintly of sweat and hope. I shook my head. Not really. My job's here. My life's here. Yeah, but what's keeping you here now? I thought about it for a second. He wasn't wrong. My job? Technically remote now. My friends? A handful, sure, but most had scattered after college or started families of their own. My family? My mom lived 2 hours north. My dad had passed a few years ago. I don't know, I said. Habit, I guess. Well, maybe it's time to break the habit. That idea stuck with me. I spent the next few weeks on autopilot, working, packing, keeping to myself. Jenna never reached out. The fraud claim was still processing, and I had to fill out a stack of paperwork with the loan company. They told me they'd investigate it as a case of identity theft, and if everything checked out, they'd remove the account from my record. I hated that word. Identity theft. It made it sound like she was a stranger. And maybe she was, in the end. Or maybe I just never saw her clearly until things fell apart. One weekend, I went to stay with my mom. It was the first time I'd really let myself slow down in weeks. She made lasagna, like she always did when something was wrong. We sat on the porch watching squirrels chase each other around the yard. I never liked that car, she said out of nowhere. I looked over at her. What? That Porsche, she said. It felt like a billboard. Like she was trying to tell people she was someone she wasn't. I didn't answer right away. She wasn't always like that, I finally said. My mom gave me a knowing look. People don't flip a switch overnight, honey. They just get better at hiding what's already there. That one stung. Because I knew she was right. I stayed the whole weekend. Helped her clean out the garage, fixed a few things around the house. It felt good to do something useful, something real. No spreadsheets, no emotional landmines, just dust, cobwebs, and a wobbly shelf I managed to fix with some drywall anchors and a YouTube video. That Sunday night, driving back to the apartment, I realized I didn't want to go home. So I didn't. I pulled over at a gas station and opened a rental site I'd been browsing casually for weeks. There was this one place I kept coming back to, a little two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a nearby town. A front porch, decent yard, nothing flashy. It looked like peace. Without thinking too much about it, I sent an inquiry. The next morning, the landlord called me. Said the place was still available, and if I could come by that afternoon, she'd show it to me. I took a long lunch break, drove over, and 15 minutes after walking in, I signed the lease. I moved in 3 weeks later. And for the first time in months, I exhaled. There was no designer furniture. No marble countertops or floor-length mirrors. Just simple walls, clean space, and a breeze that came through the windows like it belonged there. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, thrift store by thrift store. I wanted everything to have purpose. To feel earned. The funny thing is, I started sleeping better. Not just because the bed was mine, but because the silence was mine too. No anxiety about who was spending what. No worry about lies waiting to be uncovered. Just me, a mattress on the floor, and a used bookshelf I scored for $20 from a guy named Paul. Jenna never contacted me again. Not when the fraud report closed in my favor. Not when the wedding date came and went. Not even when I moved and changed my number. It was like she vanished. And I let her. I kept in touch with Rachel, though. She checked in every so often, quick messages, nothing too heavy. One day, she told me Jenna had moved to LA, got a job at a boutique agency, and was posting inspirational quotes and car selfies on Instagram like nothing ever happened. Are you okay hearing that? Rachel asked. I thought about it. Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah, I am. Because by then, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Not bitter. Not vindictive. Just finished with that chapter of my life. And maybe that's the best kind of closure there is. It's been 9 months since the wedding that never happened. The house is quiet this morning. The kind of quiet you don't notice right away, soft and settled, like the world decided to give you some breathing room. I'm sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighbor's dog chase squirrels and ignoring the pile of unopened mail on the side table. It's Sunday. I don't feel like dealing with anything stressful. It took me a long time to be okay with stillness again. After the move, I spent the first few weeks in survival mode. Wake up, go to work, keep your head down, say no to social plans, sleep. Rinse, repeat. I guess part of me thought I needed to punish myself, not for what I did, but for letting myself fall for the illusion of who Jenna was. I kept asking myself the same question over and over, how did I not see it? But here's what I eventually figured out, love makes you see what you want to see. Especially when it comes wrapped in ambition and charm and a perfectly crafted smile. Jenna didn't feel like someone who would betray me. She felt like someone who was chasing something just a little faster than the rest of us. And I admired that about her, until it spiraled into something toxic. I've since learned to take inventory of my life differently. Not just by what's in my bank account or who shares my bed, but by what isn't taking up space anymore. No more double-checking statements for secret charges. No more wondering if the truth had an expiration date. No more talking myself into being okay with things I wasn't okay with. There's peace in that. Real peace. And, somehow, space opened up for other things too. 3 months ago, I reconnected with an old friend from college. Her name's Elise. We ran into each other at a hardware store, of all places. I was buying light bulbs. She was looking for drawer liners. We talked in the aisle for nearly an hour, catching up on a decade of life in between shelf labels and flickering fluorescents. Elise is nothing like Jenna. She's quiet, thoughtful, more grounded. She listens. Really listens. We started getting coffee once a week, then dinner, then more. No labels, no pressure, just two people trying to show up honestly. She knows the whole story. I told her early on, not because I wanted to dump my emotional baggage onto someone new, but because I didn't want to start anything with half-truths. Her reaction? Simple. That must have been brutal, she said. But I'm glad you made it out of it. No judgment. No pity. Just acknowledgement. That alone told me she was someone worth keeping around. And here's the weird part, when we talk about money, or past relationships, or mistakes we've made, it doesn't feel like walking a tightrope. I don't feel like I have to be the strong, put-together guy who's always in control. I can just be Ryan. And she can just be Elise. We've taken it slow, by design. I'm not in a rush to lock myself into anything. I don't know what the future looks like. But for the first time in a long time, I'm open to the idea that it might not be as bleak as I once thought. The other day, I finally logged into that old wedding planning app to delete my account. It had been sitting there untouched for almost a year, full of timelines, budgets, and checklist items that never got checked. I scrolled through it one last time, just out of curiosity. There was a task near the bottom: write your vows. I never did. Neither did Jenna. I guess that's fitting. Because the more I think about it, the things we should have promised each other had nothing to do with centerpieces or guest lists. It should have been. I promised to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. I promised not to build a life on borrowed dreams and silent debts. I promised to choose partnership over performance. I never got to say those words to her. And maybe that's a good thing. Because now, if I ever say them again, to anyone, I'll mean every syllable. A few nights ago, Marcus and Kevin came over. We grilled burgers in the backyard and drank beers on lawn chairs like we were 22 again. They asked me if I'd ever consider getting married someday, after everything that happened. I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I said. Someday. With the right person. They both nodded. And just like that, it wasn't weird. It wasn't sad. It just was. Because the truth is, the wedding never happening wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. Staying in that relationship would have been. Signing up for a lifetime of quiet resentment, emotional instability, and financial ruin disguised as ambition. I dodged a bullet. A well-dressed, high-heeled, brand-name bullet. And if nothing else, I came out of it with my sanity, my savings, what was left of them, and the priceless knowledge that love without trust isn't love at all, it's a ticking time bomb. These days, I still keep things simple. I cook more. I go on walks without my phone. I call my mom just to say hi. I spend time with people who make me feel seen, not managed. And I remind myself every day that healing isn't a straight line, it's a zigzag path that sometimes doubles back before it moves forward. I'm okay with that now. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm walking it on solid ground.